Welcome to There is now scarcely one brick left upon another of the orphan asylum. We shall have trouble before we are through. They broke in at the rear. The children ran, some without shoes. When all was taken, the house was then set on fire. The bell was ringing, but no one came. Men with faces blackened by smoke carrying bundles not their own. They were knocked down, were beaten with fists, with clubs, with stones. I hid behind the coal bin. The floor shook like a drum. A woman begged for her boy. The rope was already over the limb. Windows burst from the heat. The stairs fell in a sound like thunder. We counted the little ones as they reached the corner one by one. There were 230 children between the ages of 4 and 12 years in the home. We are the poor rabble, and the rich rabble is our enemy. The papers print the names, the streets shout other names. The draft is paused, but the crowd is not. The constables are nowhere. Telegraph cut. No message went south of Canal. Storefronts shuttered. Eyes looked through cracks and disappeared. Colored persons pursued along the pavements, dragged by the coat stripped of his boots. A cry went up, "There goes another." The cartwheels splashed through a gutter of ash. The air was of wool and vinegar. The horses were made to turn back. From the tenement roof, the city was several fires. Smoke took the letters from the signs so that nothing could be read. A hand reached from a window and then did not. We shut the door and put the bed against it. A child coughed and would not stop. The hallway filled with feathers and soot. The river took in the embers and gave back steam. Boats moved without sound, carrying faces low. A trunk floated its straps, gnawed with heat. The piers were black with people who did not wish to be seen. Someone said the draft was fair. Someone said the night would not end. Bibles and ledgers lay open in the street. A spool of thread burned like a small stubborn sun. The asylum's iron gate twisted as if it were rope. Keys were trampled into the mud. They opened nothing. A nurse counted aloud to steady her hands. The counting went on without numbers. They called it sport. He was then hanged in the presence of his mother. Children were searched for trinkets and found to have none. A man with a hammer asked for water. We gave him water. He went on with the hammer. The soldiers arrived late, and the drum was a slow thing. A volley cracked. The crowd bent and scattered. The lamplighter came with his pole and did not strike a flame. A wagon of bricks overturned and became a wall. The bayonets shone, and the street pretended to be empty. The silence did not last. In the morning there were lists. Dead, wounded, missing. The columns shook in the press. Fate unknown. A hat claimed from the ashes, no head for it. A ring turned up in a pail, no finger. A book with the corners burned away, leaving only the word home. The church basement took in all who fit and then could take no more. Bread came in by the back stairs. A mother sewed while standing. A boy slept with his eyes open. Someone sang under breath not to be heard. The song had no verses. Those who kept diaries wrote less. Those who spoke into the night used fewer names. The children were counted again. The soot would not wash out. The street kept its marks. The bell did not ring again. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you paused. What did you feel in that silence? The temporal frame is fixed. New York City, 13 to 16 July 1863, centered on Manhattan with spillover signals to parts of Brooklyn and Westchester in contemporary reports. The purpose of this section is to identify who recorded what, under which conditions, and where those records can be consulted today, and to pose a narrow, testable question adequate to sustain scholarly curiosity as well as human concern. The source families considered are daily newspapers, police court, hospital records, federal and military papers related to the Enrollment Act, personal diaries, and correspondence, the files of charitable and religious institutions, maps and cadastral materials, insurance and indemnity claims, and later oral testimony. When later oral testimony is cited, it will be labeled as folklore and treated as contextual, not evidentiary substitution. Daily newspapers are the most voluminous, contemporaneous layer. The New York Daily Tribune, the New York Times, the New York Herald, the New York Evening Post, and Harper's Weekly carried day-by-day narratives, and in the case of Harper's, engraved illustrations. Reporting conditions were distorted by cut telegraph lines, obstructed horse traffic, and irregular night lighting in certain wards. Surviving runs exist in institutional microfilm and digitized collections at the New York Public Library, the New York Historical Society, and the Library of Congress. Editorial bias and rapid corrections are known constraints. Multiple editions within the same day may disagree at the level of casualty counts, street corners, or unit identifiers. Police and court papers form the administrative spine of the event. Metropolitan Police duty logs, arrest book, superintendent memoranda, and the post-assault statement of Superintendent John A. Kennedy exist in varying completeness alongside ward captain reports, grand jury presentments, and property damage schedules. Principal repositories are the NYC Municipal Archives for police and arrest registers and the New York County Clerk Archives for court files, with some manuscript copies at the New York Historical Society. Gaps include missing folios, torn leaves, and entries where persons are recorded as unknown or by physical description only. Medical and death records corroborate person-level outcomes. Admission registers at Bellevue, St. Luke's, and New York Hospital, as well as temporary ambulance station notes, record date and hour of intake, provisional cause, blunt trauma, gunshot, burns, disposition, transfer, or death. Coroner inquests document post-mortem findings and scene notations. Holdings are split between the Municipal Archives Historical Hospital registers and coroner files and institutional hospital archives where preserved. Instability in the naming of black victims is a documented limitation. Entries such as colored man, woman, name unknown appear with estimated ages and no family identifiers. Federal and military records document the legal mechanism of the Enrollment Act and the deployment of U.S. forces inside the city. The Provost Marshal General's Bureau compiled daily situation reports, telegraphic exchanges, tabulations of men-drawn substitutes, exemptions, and disruptions to enrollment. War Department orders tracked unit movements, rules of engagement, and the use of force. These materials are concentrated in National Archives record groups covering the Provost Marshal General, the Adjutant General, and where relevant military intelligence. Their language is technical. Their geographic frames sometimes diverge from municipal usage, requiring reconciliation with city mapping. Personal diaries and correspondence provide time-stamped civilian observation. The Diary of George Templeton Strong reports locations, rumor traffic, bridge status, and the reactions of employers and professional circles across the days of violence. Letters by Abby Hopper Gibbons, a nurse and reformer, describe hospital intake, volunteer logistics, and family intimidation. These are preserved at the New York Historical Society, the New York Public Library Manuscripts and Archives Division, and related academic special collections. Class position and social networks shape these vantage points and must be kept in view when generalizing to working-class black neighborhoods. Charitable and religious institutions documented the destruction of the Colored Orphan Asylum near Fifth Avenue between 43rd and 44th Streets and the efforts to relocate its charges. Annual reports, superintendent correspondence, post-fire expense ledgers, and pledges for reconstruction survive in institutional files and Allied Historical Society holdings. Catalogs note that lists of evacuated children are sometimes numeric only to protect minors, complicating efforts to match names to subsequent placements or school registers. Black community sources include church newspapers and congregational minutes. The Christian Recorder of the AME Church and the Anglo-African Press carried commentary and lists of aid or displacement. Congregational records at Zion AME bodies in New York contain collections for relief and provisional housing logs. Surviving sets are dispersed across the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and digitized Black press projects. Limited circulation and preservation variability are noted constraints. Maps and cadastral records allow precise spatial control. Paris Fire Insurance atlases for the 1850s, 1860s supply footprints and construction details. Property tax rolls identify ownership and assessed losses. The Board of Fire Underwriters recorded incidents by lot and street. These enable the crosswalk from narrative mentions of corners and wards to lots widths in building materials. Collections are at the NYPL Map Division, the Municipal Archives, and professional or corporate ledgers retained in Historical Society deposits. Later oral testimony is used with explicit marking as folklore. Two clusters are relevant interviews taken in the 1930s by the Federal Writers Project with persons born before or during the Civil War who later moved to New York, and parish oral histories about escape routes and informal shelters after the riots. These are identified as folklore in this narrative. They inform social memory and risk perception, but are not treated as primary confirmation of specific acts. Archival notes on one set of WPA pages contain the administrative sentence. The field worker who recorded this testimony vanished 2 years later on the same road. That statement is recorded as a file-level note without associated investigative paperwork and is carried here for completeness as a micro-hint rather than as an evidentiary claim. Methodologically, discrepancies are managed through cross-checking. Criteria include the recording lag relative to the event, the recorder's physical distance to the scene, the political and economic incentives of the issuing entity, the congruence of police, hospital, and coroner timings, and the independent repetition of a datum across repositories. Newspaper corner references are tested against atlas plates. Hospital deaths and transfers are matched against coroner inquests. Telegraph outage timing in federal reports is compared to gaps and resumptions in newspaper columns. A narrow testable research question is posed to guide subsequent sections. Were the counts of black victims listed as unidentified or marked fate unknown in the first 48 hours materially higher than the consolidated tallies issued 4 weeks later? And if so, by what mechanism were early records altered or reclassified? Indicators motivating this question include first, two-colored man name, unknown death entries in one hospital ledger that are later struck and replaced with the word transferred without a destination. Second, absence of corresponding cases in the coroner's docket for the same day. And third, a downward revision of deaths in a weekly police summary compared to initial newspaper aggregates. A secondary inquiry concerns whether a missing leaf in a women's and children's shelter register on the night of 13 July could account for a small cohort not recounted during resettlement summaries. Insurance and indemnity files constitute an often underused corroborant. Property owners, charitable bodies, and firms filed claims with private insurers and the Board of Fire Underwriters, itemizing losses and providing sworn timing. These files can refine the fire timeline, indicate the arrival or failure of protective forces by neighborhood, and provide independent valuation of damage beyond municipal tallies. Surviving series reside in Underwriter Board Records private company archives where extant and mixed donations at the New York Historical Society and the New York Public Library. Taken together, this source base supports a time-linked reconstruction from early afternoon on 13 July to the night of 16 July with person-level and street-level specificity. Newspapers supply public sequence. Police court and medical documents confirm discrete events. Federal and military files place actions within the Enrollment Act framework. Diaries and letters supply civilian timing. Charitable and religious ledgers record displacement and relief. Maps fix geography. Insurance claims adjust timing and magnitude of loss. And labeled folklore gives social memory and perceived risk without serving as proof of particular acts. The next section will test the stated research question by collating hospital registers, coroner files, and police daybooks against newspaper editions and atlas coordinates while attempting to locate the alleged missing shelter leaf in municipal archives or private donations. The WPA fieldworker note will remain a documented micro-hint only and will not be advanced as argument. In New York, newspapers from the late 18th to early 19th century during gradual emancipation and well into the apprentice and indenture system's runaway advertisements describe black men, women, and children with physical marks, clothing, and places last seen. These notices, while predating July 1863, establish a local documentary habit identification by descriptors rather than by stable surnames. When police and hospital ledgers in July 1863 register colored man, woman name unknown, the continuity of method is evident. A 1930s interviewee recalls that as a child, elders kept folded broadsheets in a drawer and said the names on them had burned off as if paper could forget faster than people. Correspondence preserved among the papers of the Provost Marshal General and the War Department records the cutting of telegraph lines, delays in relaying orders, and the staged introduction of regulars and militia into designated wards. Timetables are specific, street nodes are named, ammunition expenditure is tallied. The frame is administrative enrollments, disrupted units, detached intersections, cleared bridges, guarded. A church chronicle notes that on a Tuesday night march, sounds continued after the lamps were put out. The entry adds no regiment and no hour, only that older members agreed the sound did not come closer or recede. Police duty books and coroner dockets list bodies, retrieved injuries logged, and addresses where officers were refused entry or where entry was not possible. In the first 48 hours, several entries for black victims are marked with generic identifiers and approximate ages. Some pages contain strike-throughs replaced by transferred without destination. Cross-checking against coroner inquests yields fewer correlative case numbers than the hospital ledgers imply. A later testimony preserved in a family notebook states that a mother visited 3 precinct houses with a ribbon from her son's coat. None recorded a claim. The ribbon was tied to a bedpost in case he recognized the room by touch. Affidavits and petitions for redress submitted to municipal authorities and to private insurers enumerate losses by line item, furniture tools, clothing ledgers, assigning values and anchoring time windows for fires and assaults. In cases involving black households and businesses, sworn statements from neighbors or employers sometimes substitute for title papers, which were either burned or never held. Post-war Freedmen's Bureau correspondence, 1865 to 1866. Though primarily Southern in scope, includes exchanges with Northern relief committees and pension examiners that mention families displaced by the July 1863 disturbances, typically in the context of proving dependency or tracking beneficiaries who migrated. These references are retrospective and administrative, not narrative. One interview records a woman who came north before the worst heat and later went west with a list of names in her hem. The interviewer adds no place names. The narrative relies on remembered direction and seasons. Hospital admission registers at Bellevue St. Luke's and New York Hospital record time of entry, provisional diagnosis, and disposition. In the earliest pages, multiple entries for black patients lack stable surnames. Several are annotated with occupational tags, porter, laundress, rather than family linkages. Transfers to temporary wards are sometimes logged only by hour. A lay visitor's note in a congregational ledger reports that women hummed a familiar spiritual in the hall outside the ward. The title is not written and the text is not recorded, only that it was the tune for moving the feet without moving from the place. Administrative records from the Colored Orphan Asylum, annual reports, and post-fire circulars document the number of children evacuated, the temporary placements arranged, and the immediate accounting of clothing and bedding issued. Lists are often numeric, without full names, a privacy practice that complicates reconciliation with later school registers. A late reminiscence states that children were told to count steps at each new address and to say the number aloud at dawn. No purpose is explained. The act is framed as a method for remembering where one wakes. Black press items, particularly in church newspapers, record collections for relief, the establishment of temporary housing, and the movement of congregants away from vulnerable streets. These notices provide family names, deacons responsible for distribution, and locations of cellars or church basements used for shelter. A seamstress interviewed decades later described seeing a room of shoes with no people in a dream the week after the disturbances. She interpreted it as instruction to sew for those who had left. The report is personal, not doctrinal. Court calendars for the weeks following list indictments related to arson, assault, and theft. Many cases name white defendants and black complainants or victims, while other matters proceed without identified complainants when property owners are absent or deceased. Disposition entries note dismissals for want of witness, continuances, or transfers to higher courts. A short tale circulates that a door on a certain block knocked by itself until it was rehung. The story is anchored to a street, but to no person. It functions as a marker for neighbors to avoid gathering after sunset. Insurance examiners' reports, where extant sketch the probable origin points of fires and the sequence of spread by roofline and wind. These are useful for testing newspaper timelines and for estimating the duration between first break-in and full involvement. The tone is technical and avoids attribution of motive beyond riot. A deacon's notebook states that a brass key was found under ashes and would not fit any lock in the church. It was kept in a drawer as a reminder that some rooms have no door left. No attempt is recorded to match it elsewhere. Lists compiled by relief committees and printed in small broadsides name the temporarily missing, the located, and the dead. In the earliest broadsides, the category missing is crowded with initials and descriptors for black residents. Later consolidated lists reduce the count. The mechanism of reduction is not fully explained in the surviving paperwork, though reclassification to relocated accounts for a part. A phrase enters parlance: count once for the street, once for the door, used when taking attendance at evening meetings. It signals caution with numbers stated in public. Notarial copies of lease agreements and wage books from affected black households and enterprises when they survive in private donations show interruption of tenancy and pay cycles in mid-July. These documents add continuity to person-level identification, otherwise fragmentary in public ledgers. A teacher told pupils to keep a small scrap of paper with 3 facts: birthplace, a trusted name, and the nearest cross street, and to repeat them at night. The instruction is transmitted as routine rather than as immediate alarm. In aggregate, the record suggests a pattern. Early documentation leans on descriptors, initials, and occupational tags for black victims and survivors. Subsequent weeks convert a portion of those entries into named persons through church lists, employer attestations, and family claims. Mismatches remain where pages are damaged, where transfers lack destinations, or where numeric-only child lists cannot be reconciled. A line of caution is repeated in several oral accounts. Do not speak a full name in the alley, framed as a rule to limit what eavesdroppers or recorders can take. It is not tied to creed. It functions as a privacy defense. For the purpose of the inquiry stated earlier, whether unidentified black casualties and fate unknown designations in the first 48 hours materially exceed final consolidated tallies. The evidentiary path runs from hospital registers, entries, and strikeouts to coroner dockets, case numbers, then to police summaries, weekly revisions with corrective inputs from church relief sheets and insurer timings. Each table sits in a known repository and can be photographed or transcribed under standard access rules. One WPA page records a man who dreamed he read his own name among the missing and woke repeating a wrong street. He moved the next day. The entry ends there without interview or comment. Together, these two lanes, document and remembrance, do not collapse into one narrative. The administrative voice records units, pages, and values. The communal voice records rules for staying safe. Fragments of practice and impressions given the permanence of print. The interleaving is deliberate. The facts require the folklore to explain why some names resist consolidation. The folklore requires the facts to anchor place, hour, and count. The remainder of this study keeps both in view, noting in each instance whether a line comes from a ledger, a docket, a newspaper, or a labeled oral account, and seeking points where a descriptor becomes a name without erasing the interval in which it did not. Engines were sent toward 5th Avenue and 43rd, someone wrote, while the colored orphan asylum burned like a black sun. Stones flew, hoses were slashed, a retreat noted to avoid loss of life, ink steady while streets shook. A woman decades later said a hand lifted her through a window, soot biting her eyes, footsteps counting 1, 2, 3 and stopping. Bells were rung by the same hands that set the streets on fire, a paper bragged, and engines wandered astray. On the church steps, the whisper said the bell no longer warned. It summoned, it lured, it fed flame with spectators. A margin note asked who would count the bodies, graphite faint under the headline's boast. The next line is missing. Only one word remains: returned. Hospital notes recorded contusions and tar on a scalp. No family present, no address, no claim. A dockworker swore the man stood up after dark, wearing a hat of shadow, walking past tenements like smoke made into legs. A telegraph clerk complained the line to Harlem flickered and died, the draft office gone to heat and splinters. A street song without rhyme mentioned a clothesline waving a black shirt like a flag no unit claimed. A neighbor recalled coded knocks, 3 answered by 2, and a door that slid aside like a secret instead of swinging open. A retired policeman admitted he once walked past that alley and never lifted his knuckles. The next line is missing. Only one word remains: waiting. Harbor guards wrote of refusals to work beside black hands and promises of harm at the next tide. Whispers said the river never refused anyone, only the docks did, and only when watched. Chalk on wet wood announced, "We will come back at dawn." Letters bled by drizzle. A parish ledger listed 8 sheltered bread apportioned 2 infants feverish beneath a leaking nave. A girl sleeping under a statue swore blind marble saw the door and kept count of footsteps. Militia reports spoke of bricks from rooftops and warning shots above heads as if air could be herded. The next line is missing. Only one word remains: maybe. An undertaker's ledger held an unnamed man of 30, dark complexion, found near East 34th. A newsboy remembered a crushed hat brim, set it on a stoop like an altar to weather. Morning arrived and the hat was gone, the stoop clean as if scrubbed by rain with human hands. Aldermen debated broken glass and roofing nails while destitution was tabled for later daylight. A washerwoman set her bowl down and said they spoke of windows and walls and roofs, not cradles. A blue ink margin concluded property received a number while people received a silence with no receipt. Report: no survivors were found. Oral record. But the drums still answered that night. An inventory after the fire listed a half-burned ledger, names melted together into pages fused like slag. A bookbinder explained that when paper runs, letters swim and drown, and some cross the river of glue. Ash stood where names had stood, and the ash could not be indexed. A nurse recorded a child with soot in her lungs, whispering, "Where is the bell, sleeping, waking, asking again?" The answer traveled through hands. The bell lives in the chest. Each breath is its rope. A pencil prayer begged, "Deliver us from the rope that is not breath." The next line is missing. Only one word remains: ash. A deposition stuttered beneath an inkblot pulled by the collar, uncertain if life remained on the drag. A witness behind bars of a window said a tale of shadow was enough to parade a man through a street. Typewritten pages repeated themselves like an echo in a stairwell no one swept. A household accounted for 2 loaves missing, 1 water bucket broken, a back gate unlatched by weather or hands. A child on the kitchen floor said the bread ran away and the water found its road and the gate opened for the wind. Someone wrote in a brown notebook that a single word could be a bridge when names cannot cross. The next line is missing. Only one word remains: open. A partial roll from the orphanage preserved Anne Joseph Amelia, then tore itself into silence. A photo back carried graphite. Amelia bit her lip to stop tears. Joseph counted steps. Anne's doll lacked fingers. Questions stacked like boards: who took the picture? Who hid it? Who opened it after thunder? A petition smudged its signatures, asking for protection of homes and persons no clerk could spell safely. A black cobbler hammered a closed door until his palm became the tool and the wood spoke silence. The margin shook as it noted that sometimes silence is a city built atop a city. The next line is missing. Only one word remains: dawn. Dispatches marched up 3rd Avenue where resistance scattered and smoke set the weather to burnt noon. Families breathed under beds as if under boats turned upside down by a storm in the hallway. Heat stood in the middle of rooms like a tall guest. The clock turned its face to the wall. A ruined trunk yielded a shawl, a hymn book, 2 spoons, and a note: "Tell Aunt M, the river remembers." Aunt M answered in the story that the river remembers because it learned names and repeats them quietly at the bank. Somewhere someone pressed an ear to the ground the way others listen to a shell. The next line is missing. Only one word remains: through. A provisional mortality report admitted totals incomplete and identification ongoing, a ledger allergic to certainty. The graveyard gatekeeper wrote unknown all morning, then tried homeward once for a body without a key. A shop receipt bought boards and nails and lamp oil to blind the street's eyes for a night. Customers traded fragments. The boards cover the window, but the dark still sees in. A testimony from later years insisted some men brought bread like a rumor of decency. Another hand added that someone left water on a stoop, and someone pulled a child into a doorway, and someone stopped throwing. The next line is missing. Only one word remains: listen. Corrections revised figures weeks later. Numbers turned like birds under a cloud. Names did not return, the whisper said, because names were asked to stay. A pencil street map ringed 43rd and 29th and Avenue C, arrows nudging every path toward river. A fevered child drew it again in chalk years later. Here we ran, here we did not. Here. The bell refused a second strike. City Hall declared order restored, a new coat stitched on crooked shoulders. An old woman knitting under oil light said, "When the coat tears, the red thread shows again." Report. No survivors were found. Oral record. But the drums still answered that night. A diary dated July 16 saw a boy with a drum he did not strike held like a shield against daylight. In kitchens, people said the drum made no sound and everyone heard it just the same. A poster offered reward for information and a hand-scrawled line covered it saying, "No reward needed, only names." Hospital forms stamped stabilized, transferred, unknown. A clerk exhaling the word unknown until it lost its edges. Each evening a man stood outside the gate wearing a crushed hat brim, his silhouette a question against brick. A parish closet inventory ended with a small drum split at the head and a child promising to mend it. The next line is missing. Only one word remains: returned. They drew a new city on paper. Once the fires cooled, arrows traced from 5th Avenue to the ferry slips, dotted lines up 3rd Avenue, hatched zones where doors stayed shut. A clerk in a clean office shaded blocks to show departures after July bodies turning into numbers turning into rivers that ran north. The map called it migration, as if a verb were enough to lift feet. In a room where windows wore soot like veils, an old woman hummed a tune that laid its own roads. Her finger moved over the table tap for corner slide, for alley circle, for a safe door, and the hum said, "Keep to shadow, keep to water, keep your name folded." The song called it crossing, as if a breath could carry a house. A reconstruction officer later swore before a panel that families removed for their safety had resettled satisfactorily. He listed towns like beads on a cord: Albany, Troy, Springfield. He spoke of relief rations, of tasking men to mend roads that did not yet feel like theirs. He concluded that order returned and with it the promise of wages. Down near a cellar mouth, a woman poured water from one tin to another and said the river keeps two kinds of names, those carried on boats and those carried in throats. She told a child to sip slow, to remember a taste can be a map. When the tin rang empty, she tapped its rim, and the metal answered like a quiet bell. A soldier's letter home reached a kitchen. A winter later the paper, brittle and clean from the march. He wrote that he had seen crowds in draft towns without the discipline of war, but not without purpose. He wrote that he had walked past the very street where orphan windows once shone, and he had kept his eyes forward, because the manual taught him how to aim and how to march, but not how to look back. In a night dream repeated 3 times that winter, the letter opened its mouth and sang. It sang of a boy holding a drum like a shield, and of a silence louder than any volley. It sang of a bell inside a chest that would not ring for the joy of it, only for the gathering. When the dream ended, the kitchen lamp made a halo on the table, as if paper could be a saint. Newspapers later printed a map with arrows broader than streets, handsome to the eye, an exodus from lower avenues, an increase in wards farther north, a switchback across the East River. They pasted small icons, looms, docks, kitchens to show what hands would do when they arrived. The legend named each symbol as if naming were shelter. In a meeting parlor, the elders named a different set of things, drums that hadn't sounded. Prayers said without a church, footsteps counted between breaths, so a heart could keep time when it was alone. They said you could tell a safe door by the way the floorboards sang under the first step, low and steady, not a squeal. They said the floor learns your weight like a friend learns your laugh. The Bureau's testimony recorded that apprehensions persist among the colored population, that confidence is to be restored by law's slow hand. In neat lines, the clerk wrote of patrol routes, of court dockets cleared of compensation schemes that turned soot and glass into coins. He filed the report with a string and a nod. In houses where walls still remembered the pattern of thrown stones, women tied red thread around wrists before stepping out a color against the city's throat. At doorways, they tapped lintels twice and whispered the names of those who ran and the names of those who stayed. The whispers made a fence the law could not see, but could not cross without asking permission. A private in the 7th wrote to his mother that he had watched the river in the evenings and believed he could see unrest leave the water the way heat leaves a road. He wished for winter. He wished for a stable horizon. He wished his dreams would stop climbing the fire escapes of buildings he had never entered. A grandmother told her grandson that the river does not keep unrest. It keeps reflections. Look long enough, she whispered over his hair, and the water will show you the face you carry and the face you left behind. When the boy asked which face was true, she said truth was a coin held between the two turning. The press praised citizens who repaired the fabric of the metropolis, boards nailed, bells rehung, streets swept. The photograph showed a bright broom. In the corner, a small blur might have been a child or a smudge. The caption did not say. In a back room, a circle of neighbors passed a basin clockwise and sang low so the tune rolled like a cart on wooden wheels. The words were old and made new. Rock me in the water, cover me with night, carry me past the counting. The basin shivered when the deepest voice hit the note that bent the room toward dawn. A map from a charitable society charted colored migration with tiny arrows sprouting like bristle. They concluded that the city redistributes itself according to fear and work. Their survey asked if tenants had confidence in municipal protection. The choice of answers was yes or no. A margin had no box for maybe. A ritual traveled under collars and cuffs. It used no incense, no candles, only the alignment of ordinary things. A spoon laid north, a book kept open to the hymn whose words no one read aloud, a penny under the doorstone for return. The ritual had no doctrine beyond the belief that a pattern could hold a life steady the way a hand holds a bowl. A Reconstruction circular advised colored tenants to seek congregated strength in wards where support networks exist, naming streets with the care of a mother counting fingers. It promised to intercede when landlords forgot themselves. It noted that forgetting was frequent. A woman on a stair placed her palm against the baluster and told the wood to remember her because remembering is the opposite of fire. She pressed her child's palm to the same place, and then the child's breath, and then their two names laid in a whisper like a plank. A soldier in a different regiment wrote of campfire hymns that sounded like the sound of the breeze passing through pine, and then corrected himself, not like, but as if the breeze were coming from the singing. He had learned to tell one drum beat from another in the field. In the hymn, he heard a drum that did not need a hand. A girl dreaming in a borrowed bed saw herself walking through a city with the sky set low like a roof hand-built. Each step rippled the street, and faces appeared in the ripples, faces that did not startle when they recognized her. They simply nodded as if to say, "Go on, we are under you, like water under a bridge." When she woke, she had salt on her lips. The morning edition carried a column about Negro enlistments rising after July, a calculus where terror turned into uniforms and pay. The writer called it irony, as if language could put a fence around cause and effect. He did not ask the names on the enlistment lines to say what they had lost. In kitchens, when paper slid under doors, hands set it beside the pot but did not open it at once. First they set the table. First they watered the plant that kept its green on a sill where ashes once drifted. Then they read, and while they read, they hummed, and while they hummed, the letters behaved. The letters held still. The letters did not swim. A benevolent association printed a route of safety with small stars on corners where a window would open to a knock known only to those who had learned it the hard week. They drew a compass rose in the lower right. Its points were not north, south, east, west. Its points were bread, water, warmth, witness. At the end of a vigil that no clock marked, a man stood and poured the dregs of the basin in a line across the threshold. "We cross water either way," he said. "If we leave, we cross. If we stay, we cross." The line darkened the wood, and the wood drank, and the house felt heavier and safer by the weight of the line. Later, when all the reports had been bound in brown, a clerk stacked them by month. The spines looked like a city seen from above. Long blocks, short alleys, one volume thinner than it should have been. He touched the thin one with a fingertip and felt the air of a page that should have been, but wasn't. Later still, when the basin had dried and the hum had become a hush, someone traced the rim with a fingernail. The high ring trembled the glass in the cupboard. The sound said bell without saying bell. It said return without saying return. It asked a question without a mark. A printed map in a library case shows the year 1863 as a hinge, arrows leaving arrows, arriving arrows, dividing like branches. The legend speaks in clean type of movements and trends, as if people were tides and not hands, not mouths, not backs. A quilt on a bed holds a different legend. The square of doorways, the bar of river, the sawtooth of stairs, the tight-lipped strip of alley. In its stitched hush, a story repeats until it is memorized by the night we went out. We came back. We held the drum without striking it. We listened for the bell in the chest. We named the way by breathing. The quilt's reverse is plain muslin, smooth as the inside of an eyelid, and when you lift it to the light, the seams glow like a city's veins. The last line we have is not a line at all, but a hush held between two breaths. A boy with a drum he will not strike. A bell that lives under the breastbone and rings only when a name is carried from one mouth to another. A river that keeps reflections like coins at the bottom of a jar, glinting when the lamp tilts. A dream that returns without footsteps, arriving like fog and leaving a taste of iron. We open the ledger and it does not open back. We open the window and the air stands still. We listen. The room grows larger around the listening. No one writes the next report. Ink dries in the wells. The clerk, who could name every street by number and every alley by rumor, places his pen down and folds his hands as if holding the city steady by not moving. In the hall below the stair answers each footfall with an old wood note that knows who is heavy with grief and who is light with guilt. Both notes decay into the same quiet. Somewhere a door closes and the latch catches like a soft click of a pocket watch. Time keeps on, but it keeps small. Even the brooms lean against the wall, their bristles learning stillness. Silence fills the places that had once been arguments. The parlor where men swore they had counted correctly becomes a room where counting stops at 1. The kitchen where a letter sang in its envelope now holds a bowl and a spoon facing one another like two moons in a cupboard sky. The street pauses with boards across its eyes. We walk past and do not whisper. We do not need to. The night hears what we choose not to say and places it with care beside the other unsaids. The bells not rung, the names not spoken, the hands not taken. Nothing falls. It is all suspended as if sound were a coat we agree not to rustle. Down by the river, the wind lies down, a long animal smoothing itself against the water. The ferries breathe smoke and then hold their breath. The piers answer with the minimal creak that tells you wood is alive. Faces are doubled on the surface, the one you bring and the one the city stamped into you. You wait for ripples to make a choice, and they refuse. They widen and widen until they are only the river. Some say a shadow crossed the far bank and did not trouble the water. Some say the water kept a drumbeat you could only hear if you looked away. The shoreline keeps its own counsel. Pebbles and rope and tar do not vote. We return to the drum because the drum returns to us. It sits where a child left its skin-split body round as a held breath. A small hand rests on it, and the hand is still. The sound that rises is not struck. It is gathered. It is the heartbeat of a house learning to be a house again. It is the pulse of a street where feet know to step light. Each room around the drum arranges itself chairs drawn in table-steady windows, admitting only enough light to see one another's faces. We listen for the part that once meant danger, the quick double that sent people running. It is not there. What remains is the slow syllable that says, "Stay." The bell in the chest answers without metal. A woman stands in a doorway and you can see the moment the bell begins. Her shoulders straighten not as a soldier's would, but as a beam takes weight. She inhales, and the sound happens in the keeping of that breath. Children attentive to invisible instruments imitate her posture and become tall in small bodies. No one calls this prayer. No one calls it law. No one calls it anything. You feel its circle widen, an unseen ring growing in the quiet, touching the table, the window latch, the shoes left by the mat, the seam where floorboards meet. The city hears through the souls of its rooms. There is a dream that walks the length of the avenues and leaves no print. In the dream, steps are counted not to flee but to remain. 3 to the stove, 2 to the basin, 1 to the door to listen without opening. In the dream, the river passes under all streets, thin as wire ringing when a name crosses the threshold, mouthed soft as steam. In the dream, a drum is carried as a shield and becomes a mirror that does not show the face, but the space around the face, the air that held it, the light that did not leave. People wake with salt on their lips and cannot say if it came from tears or from the memory of water. They drink and say nothing. We go back to the last oral line and do not move past it. A grandmother repeats it with the exactness of someone tying a knot. The bell is in the chest. You do not own it. You hold it while it rings. A boy repeats it back not as words but as posture. A neighbor repeats it by tapping twice on wood and hearing wood remember. These are not sayings. They are actions that do not need tools. When a letter arrives with its tidy sentences and its confident seals, it is placed carefully beside the bowl and spoon, and the room listens to see if the letter will learn the quiet. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the wax sighs when it breaks. The city offers its own hush a late afternoon when the wind and the cartwheels and the far-off hammering align to leave a beat of nothing. In that beat, a list could be read and is not. In that beat, an apology could be spoken and is not. In that beat, the curtain lifts a fraction, and the light it admits is the exact light from the day the fire started, and it is bearable. We do not call the beat a pause because a pause anticipates resuming. This is not a pause. This is a decision made without words. The broom stays still. The ledger remains closed. The names do not swim. The water holds them whole as coins that have never left a palm. Someone says the river remembers, and someone else across a wall says yes, and neither needs to raise a voice. The agreement travels through plaster like heat. It reaches the basin where a circle of neighbors once sang and spins once more, slower now, as if the basin understood it has become a map of return. A finger traces its rim, and the cupboard glass trembles. What is heard is not a note so much as the outline of a note, the place where sound would stand if invited. The outline is enough. People step into it as into a doorway. Across the street, an old woman sets down her knitting and listens with her hands, palms open as if catching rain. We begin to count not bodies or boards or coins, but breaths. Breaths of those who stayed. Breaths of those who left and wrote back only in the weather that arrived with their letters. Breaths of rooms calmed by deliberate order, the spoon where the spoon goes, the book open to the hymn. No one reads aloud the penny beneath the stone. Each breath is a bell rope drawn once carefully. Each breath sways the day a little. Each breath returns the drum's curve to the center so that even split it holds. Between breaths, the quiet is thick as cloth, and you could wrap it around a child to carry them without waking. At the river again, a second time, perhaps a third, the surface gives nothing away. The ferries move and do not call to one another. A fisherman believes he hears a cadence but does not name it. He draws in his line, respects the hour. The far bank is a story someone else will tell. On this bank there is the business of standing and the steadying of hands. The rope that once dragged now ties. The knot is plain and holds. Reflections ours, the cities lie side by side. A ripple passes and leaves them entire. The water does not clap. It keeps a time measured in faces that lean over it and do not speak. It is late, or else it is early. A child wakes and sits up listening. The drum at the foot of the bed is mended, but no one touches it. The bell is exactly where it has been all day. The dream walks through the room without rustle, lays its cool hand on the child's forehead, and goes. House timbers breathe. A shoe leather settles. The small sound the night makes when a city decides to live is heard by no one and by everyone. No one writes it down because there are no letters for it. The page remains blank, which is not the same as empty. We tuck the page into the ledger and close the cover and place a flat palm upon it, feeling the quiet beat once. The record today is assembled from pieces that survived heat haste and forgetting. A volunteer at the municipal archives opens a gray Hollinger box and slides out a police blotter leaf dated July 1863. The ink has browned the edges feathered. At the New York Historical Society, a curator retrieves a charred ledger fragment from the draft office pages fused into a black comb, names melted together. Bellevue Hospital's register lies under glass. The nurse's hand is steady, the column for kin often blank. In a reading room at the Schomburg Center, a descendant unfolds a soldier's letter that came home in winter and was folded again for half a century. The Freedmen's Bureau microfilm reels click forward at the National Archives, and a clerk's neat script reports families removed for their safety and order restored. Newspaper morgues offer columns revised weeks later, casualty totals corrected, outrage translated into arithmetic. A parish writes 8 sheltered into its ledger. The entry is brief, unadorned, legible. Other materials sit where fire did not reach. A charitable society's migration map still shows thin arrows leaving lower avenues and thicker ones arriving uptown and across the East River. A shopkeeper's receipt for lamp oil and nails holds the date a street boarded its eyes. A private diary mentions a boy with a drum held like a shield. In the city survey volumes, the questions, "Do you feel protected?" and "Will you stay?" are printed above boxes for yes or no. The margin leaves no room for maybe. Parts are missing. Records of the colored orphan asylum burned with the building. Roll calls are reconstructed from memory and newspaper enumerations that do not agree. The undertaker's notebooks list unnamed male beside street corners that changed their names in later decades. Witness depositions contradict. One says the rope was already tied. Another insists no rope was found. A harbor log notes threats issued at Pier 19 without naming who spoke. Some oral histories survive only as paraphrase in a teacher's memoir, secondhand voices whose first speakers no longer had a chance to testify. Certain facts are clear. The riots begin on July 13, 1863, and last several days. The draft is the stated spark. The engine is older. Targets include black New Yorkers, abolitionists, interracial institutions, and symbols of city authority. The colored orphan asylum is attacked and burned. The children escape with the aid of staff and neighbors. Militia regiments eventually restore street-by-street control. Migration follows families relocate uptown to Brooklyn, to towns that appear in bureau lines and on church rolls. Enlistments of black men rise as summer turns to fall. The river does not change course. The city does. Certain truths remain partial. The exact number of the dead is contested. Unknown appears often in ledgers and on stones. The proportion of arson to opportunism to organized terror cannot be settled with surviving evidence. Silent choices. A door opened at midnight, a bucket left on a stoop, a child pulled into a hallway. Do not leave paperwork. The inward change, the timing of breath, the weight of a step, the moment a bell in a chest begins to answer is not reducible to line items. We keep hearing the motifs because the sources keep placing them back in our hands. The drum appears in 3 places: a staff note in a child care ledger, a private diary line, and a later family story. In 2, it is unstruck, protective, a surface that reflects the room's breath. In 1, it is carried like a mirror that does not show a face but the space around a face. The river appears on maps and in letters as arrows of departure and return as a sentence. Tell Aunt M. The river remembers as a witness that keeps reflections but not verdicts. The bell recurs in hospital notes and recollection. A child asks, "Where is the bell?" and the answer passes hand to hand. In the chest. The dream repeats in fragments you can align across years. Steps counted not to flee but to remain, a cool hand on a brow, salt on the lips, on waking. Present tense curation is not neutrality, it is responsibility. We can say who found what: a cataloger flagged the burnt ledger, a great-granddaughter donated the letter, a conservator humidified a fused page, a parish deacon scanned a thin book of shelter entries, a city historian matched a shop receipt to a block now renamed. We can say where items live: Municipal Archives, New York Historical Society, Schomburg Center, National Archives, diocesan repositories, small congregational closets, private boxes under beds. We can say what continues to elude us: the voices that never reached a recorder, the names that swam off the page when paper ran, the faces cropped by a photographer's frame, the numbers corrected after the fact and still not right. We can also say what returns when we listen. In rooms where people lay out sources, a hush sometimes rises that is not reverence but recall. The ledgers and letters pulled into light do not speak, the readers do. Someone's breath sinks with a remembered cadence. The clink of a ring against a reading room table is a bell without metal. The page's margin widened by time becomes a shallow river where reflections coexist without canceling each other. The drum, even as a split line in a parish inventory, remains round enough to gather a circle. In an age of microphones and optimized sound, the story's strongest passage is unscored. No music, no effects. The silence does the carrying. There is a temptation to end with the comfort of completion, a final total, an ultimate reckoning, a plaque that says finished. The material will not let us do that honestly. It insists on edges. It leaves a blank where an answer would go and asks whether we can live with it. In that blank, the motifs turn from artifacts into measures. Are we still counting breath? Do we place the bowl and the spoon where they steady a room? Do we hear the outline of a note when a neighbor traces a rim? Do we treat migration as an arrow on a legend or as a set of names that need seats at a table? The present voice can state that the city learned. It can also observe that the learning required choices that did not become headlines. A safe knock, a door unlatched, a basin passed clockwise, a red thread tied at a wrist, a corner where a window opens for those who know it will. These are civic acts as much as votes or boards or budgets. They are not listed in minutes, they are kept in memory as practice. When we consult the archive, we see the traces of law. When we consult the neighborhoods, we find the grammar of care. Return to the first hook, the drum, the river, the bell, the dream. We can hear them now without leaning. The drum answers by holding the circle even when no hand strikes it. The river answers by giving back reflections intact after the ripple has passed. The bell answers by happening inside the body, a signal that dignity has not ceded its ground. The dream answers by walking across years and leaving a cool print on a present forehead. No one wrote again at the precise place the ledger broke, and still the reply traveled. The echo did not need ink. If there is an inversion left to speak, it is not a twist of cleverness, but a responsibility turned around. The question we brought, why people vanished into the heat of days that summer lands elsewhere, when read against the quiet that followed and the practices that endured. Maybe they didn't disappear, maybe we did. The subject then is not simply riot, but relation, how a city writes some of its people out and how those people write themselves back in through routes of safety mapped in chalk, through breath counted in kitchens, through the unstruck drum that keeps a household whole, through the bell in the chest that rings without permission. The theme, plain, unornamented, is, this justice begins where we choose to hear the quiet reply and arrange our rooms, our streets, and our records, so that the reply does not have to shout to survive.